Hello and welcome to Sustainable City Network's presentation of a webcast that will step you through the design guidelines for transit-supportive communities developed by PACE Suburban Bus Services, a suburban Chicago transit provider that operates one of the largest bus services in North America. My name is Dick McGrain with Sustainable City Network, publishers of the online trade magazine scitynetwork.com. Along with webinars like the one you're viewing today, we also produce a weekly email newsletter, a quarterly print magazine, conferences, and other interactive content specifically designed for local government officials who are involved in the day-to-day challenge of building sustainable communities. We reach readers in all 50 states and throughout Canada with quality and timely information on sustainability, best practices, products, and services. We're thrilled that more than 400 leaders from cities and counties across the nation have registered for today's presentation, and we'd like to thank PACE for making this webinar possible. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's webcast. Bryce Word, Special Projects Manager with the Office of External Relations, has been with PACE Suburban Bus Services for 13.5 years. He began his career at PACE as a bus driver in the Paratransit Division in Elgin, Illinois, while working through graduate school at Northern Illinois University. Many of his duties include going through PACE's 6-county service area and educating the public on the transit options that are available within the region. During his tenure at PACE, Bryce has literally spoken to and interacted with tens of thousands of residents throughout Chicago and Northeast Illinois about the viability, reliability, and accessibility of PACE services and how the agency's transit offerings can improve the quality of life within the Chicagoland area. Following his presentation, Bryce will be joined by Tom Radak, Project Manager with PACE Strategic Services, Long Range Planning Section, and a panel of PACE professionals who will assist with the question and answer session. So now, Bryce, please begin.
Thank you, Dick, for that introduction. Good day, everyone, and welcome. Let us begin. PACE's Transit Supportive Guidelines, also referred to as Development Guidelines, illustrate the best practices for transit-supportive urban design. These guidelines detail how to eliminate barriers to transit usage and highlight the benefits of transit-supportive design. Developers, planners, elected officials, and transportation professionals can create better regional accessibility and encourage economic development by partnering with PACE to implement transit-supportive development in their communities. The guidelines will assist municipalities and developers as they design more transit-friendly streets, sidewalks, and public or private development. We want to help improve our communities by making access to employment easier, improving our environment and air quality, and reducing congestion. PACE serves primarily suburban communities. Land design in these areas is not always transit or pedestrian friendly. PACE, along with municipalities and developers, can help change that by utilizing the Design Review Assistance for Transit program, or DRAFT. We will be coming back to this free program later in the webinar. PACE would like to get involved in municipal and private planning processes at the very beginning, even in communities not currently served by PACE. If new development is transit-friendly, PACE will be able to serve that area in the future without the costs associated with retrofitting the roadway. This is an expensive and time-consuming process that often prevents PACE from providing effective service. Infrastructure built today typically has a 20 to 50-year lifespan. If this development does not accommodate transit by integrating PACE's guidelines, communities risk being precluded from service for decades or spending a significant amount of money to retrofit their community for transit. By planning ahead for transit accommodation, we can reduce congestion and pollution while improving transit efficiency and on-time performance. This thereby enriches the quality of life for northeastern Illinois residents. These guidelines were created with the help of two committees. One was an advisory committee consisting of developers, community officials, representatives from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, the Active Transportation Alliance, the local Council of Mayors, and a representative from ComEd. The other committee was a technical committee consisting of members of PACE's sister agencies, METRA, which is Chicagoland's commuter rail service, the Chicago Transit Authority, and the Regional Transportation Authority. Also included were the Illinois Department of Transportation and the Illinois State Toll Highway Authority. We gathered feedback at several committee meetings and integrated those ideas into the guidelines. Defining the components of the transit trip is a key element of these guidelines. There are 5 components considered. The first and most important component is the rider, our customer, and your constituent, client, or employee. In our review of the design and implementation of the transit environment, our focus was to make transit as safe, comfortable, and appealing as possible to area commuters. In our consideration of the rider's needs, we looked at consumer satisfaction index survey results, white papers, and focus groups conducted at PACE. We found that riders prefer to have a safe, covered waiting area away from the curb, comfortable seating on the bus, and readily available schedule and timing information, among other things. The second component of the transit trip is the development lot. This is the origin or destination of the rider and the transit trip, no matter what the trip might be. This could be a school trip, work trip, shopping trip, or medical visit. Here you see an example of what we consider an attractive development lot. Notice how the bus has accessibility directly to the front door of the property, allowing passengers a quick path from bus to door. This minimizes pedestrian vehicle interaction and is helpful on rainy or snowy days. The third component of the transit trip is the public walk. This is the rider's first and last mile of the trip. Included are sidewalks, crosswalks, countdown signals, bike paths, ADA accessible curb ramps, and general accessibility to transit. Without a safe pathway, a pedestrian is less likely to choose public transit. On this slide, you see an example of a public walk that is conducive to transit use versus one that is not. Notice how, in the photo on the left, the shelter is removed from the curb and has a well-maintained shelter. It is connected to the sidewalk network and has very visible signage. In the photo on the right, we can see that the sidewalk network does not connect completely with the shelter pad. This incomplete sidewalk network may encourage an unsafe situation in which pedestrians may choose to use the street. In these guidelines, PACE promotes a complete sidewalk network with ADA-compliant pedestrian amenities. The fourth component of the trip is the transit stop. A well-designed stop supports the rider's needs in terms of safety, comfort, and information. The stop includes signs, shelters, landing pads, lighting, transfer facilities, transit centers, and turnouts. Here you see an example of a transit center and a pedestrian-friendly transit stop. In the photograph of the transit center, you can see that the area is covered from the elements and provides a safe, uninterrupted path for pedestrians to transfer between modes of transportation without having to cross a roadway. The transit stop shown is set back from the roadway, covered by an ADA-compliant bus shelter, and has available signage. These are a few of the components that make a safe and comfortable bus stop. The fifth and final component of the transit trip is the vehicle and infrastructure that provides the rider with the transit service. The infrastructure includes the roadway that the vehicle travels on and all the components to help facilitate the transit trip. These components include transit signal priority, queue jumping, dedicated right-of-way, and street design. Vehicle amenities like Wi-Fi, air conditioning, seating, vehicle lifts, mobility securement devices, and bike racks are also considered in this component set. In the photographs shown, you can see one of PACE's over-the-road coaches used for some express routes. This one is authorized to use the shoulder lane. These buses have comfortable seating, air conditioning, Wi-Fi, and of course lifts. All PACE buses are equipped with ADA-compliant vehicle lifts and mobility securement. On the left, you can see a lift in use. In addition to the land use and development components, the document also looks at technical approaches to implementing the transit-supported design principles. These include the infrastructure needed to support service. For example, our buses need a 35-foot turning radius to safely navigate a right turn without encroaching into the adjacent lane. The technical approach looks at the land use and density in addition to site design and the facilities needed to support service. Technical approaches to service, public realm development, and private realm development are covered. PACE offers a family of services in the Chicagoland region. We have fixed route buses, local and arterial routes, express buses, van pools, ride sharing, local circulators, call-in rides, and dial-a-rides. Soon, PACE will offer arterial rapid transit, or ART, in corridors throughout the region. The type of infrastructure and facilities needed to accommodate PACE vehicles are covered in the guidelines. Infrastructure needs include shelters, pads, signage, crosswalks, and facility access. Facility types discussed include park and rides, transit centers, and bus turnouts. Components of the public realm include the type of roadway serving a facility, the type of pedestrian pathway to a facility, the types of signage at a facility, and traffic calming techniques. This component makes the trip safer for the transit rider and other pedestrians. Components of the private realm include the density to support transit, the design of the site to maximize transit usage, access to the site, design of the building to improve access, and any on-site transit facility. The guidelines were created to present an engaging and informative document that is accessible to all audiences. On the guidelines microsite, which we will discuss in more detail shortly, a pull-down menu allows various stakeholders to see how the guidelines apply directly to them. Elected officials can see how they can use the transit supportive guidelines to make decisions for overall structure of their community service. Engineers can use it for specifications and drawings. Templates, transit checklists, and implementation tools are available for download on the microsite. Also available are recommendations for vehicle and service, bus stop locations, passenger facilities, and parking options. One of the main products of the Transit Supportive Guidelines is the Design Review Assistance for Transit Program, or DRAFT. The DRAFT program is a complementary in-house technical review for private development plans or public municipal upgrades. PACE transportation engineers will look over plans for private development or municipal upgrades and talk about transit accommodation. By seeking PACE's recommendations early in the design process, developers and municipalities avoid having to spend time and money retrofitting land use for transit. An example of this process is when a municipal leader is working on a roadway reconstruction project in an area where PACE operates a fixed route bus. If the municipality contacts PACE early in the design phase, PACE engineers will be able to provide recommendations for pedestrian infrastructure for transit connectivity, including specifications for roadway width, any need for a bus pad at a stop, the requirement for a shelter pad and shelter, and the turning radii requirement for safe maneuvering. An example of using a technical approach in the private sector development can be seen in the design of a senior center along a main arterial route. In order to provide the greatest mobility possible for its future residents, the developer would like to have a bus turnout in front of the property with an ADA-compliant bus shelter. Pace Transportation Engineers has the expertise to make sure that a turnout is feasible and realistic, and will provide specifications for the turnout. The developer would have Pace's full backing in the installation of an ADA-compliant bus shelter. Pace will work with the developer to make passenger loading as easy and comfortable as possible. The application for the draft review process is available through the Guidelines microsite and does not require any additional information that would not already be needed for municipal review. And again, this service is free to developers and communities in the northeastern Illinois region. An exciting product of our program is its microsite. This site, which is a group of subpages and links on Pace's main website, can be found at pacebus.com/guidelines. And there you can view the guidelines by section or download a complete file to review or print. The microsite offers different audiences a tailored look at how they can use the guidelines. Elected officials, municipal staff, developers, architects, engineers, transportation professionals, residents, and business owners can all select an option that delivers information on how the guidelines are applicable specifically to them. The microsite also contains a section about the current events related to the guideline document and introduces the draft program. Pace has an extensive marketing and communications campaign designed to promote the guidelines. The goal of this campaign is to create awareness and encourage those involved in land use planning and decision making to download and review the guidelines and to utilize the draft program. Target markets include elected officials, specifically mayors and managers, regional and community planners, developers, engineers, public work managers, municipal professionals, business and economic development directors, and architects. Print media includes a full-page 4-color ad in the January and February editions of APA Planning Magazine. This magazine has a national distribution of 37,000 per issue and is aimed at planning professionals. Another full-page 4-color ad was placed in the January edition of Sustainable City Network magazine and is geared toward municipal professionals. Digital media includes this very webinar, which was promoted through multiple e-blasts and through Pace social media. This will be recorded and posted on Pace's website and our YouTube channel. 3 e-blasts have been sent through American City and County to 1,200 Chicago area city, county, and state officials. Display banners were purchased on Crane's Chicago business website. These ads, found on the Greg Hines political blog page, were displayed for 2 weeks in December and 2 weeks in January and gave 375,000 impressions. Behaviorally and geographically targeted display banners aimed at elected officials, architects, and those with government jobs were displayed in January and February and garnered 1,760,000 impressions. An article about the guidelines is planned for the spring edition of Pace's print newsletter, On Board. 25,000 of these are printed and distributed to writers and other stakeholders. There was also an article in Pace's email newsletter, Moving Forward, late last year. Social media will also be used to spread the word about the guidelines. 4,800 direct mail pieces will go out at the end of February and throughout March, targeting elected officials, engineers, planners, transportation directors, and public work managers. In addition to presentations given at local planning and development agencies by Pace staff members, Pace staff representatives will present the guidelines regionally at community and business meetings beginning in March. This phase of the promotion is still being planned and may include lunch and learns, giveaways, sponsorships, and other promotions. Here are some samples of the campaign creative. On the left is the print ad, and on the right you see the direct mail piece. On behalf of Executive Director T.J. Ross, in addition to the management and staff of Pace Suburban Bus Services, we would like to extend a heartfelt thanks to all of you for attending this webinar today. As you can see, smart development and land use principles can define transit accessibility. PACE's transit supportive guidelines can help encourage intelligent land use choices, help create development that supports transit usage, and make places more livable, more accessible, more sustainable, and greatly enhance overall quality of life. Thank you for your time and attention today, and please submit any questions you may have via the webinar software. Once again, we appreciate your attendance today. This is Bryce Ward.
Bryce, thanks for an outstanding presentation. We do have questions coming in, so now I'd like to introduce the panelists who will be joining Bryce in the Q&A session. Thomas Radek has been with Pace Suburban Bus for 26 years and is currently Senior Projects Manager with Pace Strategic Services Long Range Planning Section. Tom's background is in geography and land use planning. He was the lead project manager for the Transit Supportive Guidelines project. Dwayne Mahone is the transportation engineer responsible for the implementation of Pace's 6-county multi-model draft program, providing development review assistance for transit during Phase 1 and Phase 2 design. Dwayne coordinates with state, county, and local agencies and private developers for the inclusion and improvement of transit and pedestrian infrastructure. Adrian Woolner has been working at PACE since May of 2012 and works in the long-range planning section as the transit and land use planner. The production of this document is one of Adrian's very first projects at PACE, and she is proud to see the results of the process. Maggie Daly-Skoldsbakken is in her 8th year at PACE. She is the Marketing and Promotion Supervisor and works to promote PACE's family of services and communicate service changes. Maggie has a bachelor's degree in fine art from Columbia College and a master's degree in integrated marketing and communications from Roosevelt University. So Tom, let's get right to our first question. First question is there a correlation between poor performing transit and lack of TOD zoning development standards, and are there example cities?
Okay, thank you, Dick. There is a correlation between poor performing service and lack of TOD. There are many cities that show improvements by putting in a TOD. I can think of Denver, I can think of Portland, Oregon, a few other examples like that. I think it's key that the development is put in place in concurrent with the transit service, and in some cases before there is transit service, so that the development does not have to be retrofitted to accept a bus coming into its development. There are many examples of great transit-oriented development, and there are some bad examples as well, as things that, well, maybe the bus does not stop in front of the location of the building, or people have to walk, 2-3 blocks to get just to the doorway. So there are examples like that.
Okay, next question is, could you describe your working relationship with local land use authorities to get them to adopt your guidelines and include you in any of their pre-application processes for land use applications?
Currently, well, this is all a new process to us. So we're going out. We have a bunch of development reps that go out to the communities. They talk to elected officials. They talk to engineers, planners, and they try to get them aware of these guidelines and some of the services that we offer, including our draft program. So things are improving slowly as we go out and do more of these presentations. we hope to have more people involved and interested in the program. So we are having a good working relationship with some communities and developers as well, and we're always looking to improve on that.
All right, next question is, have you done any outreach in the development community?
I do know that we are starting to put together an outreach program in which, like I said, our reps will be going out looking at talking to communities and developers and people like that. We are doing more. Going to be doing more of these presentations. This webinar is part of the outreach program. It's going to be recorded and put on our website, pacebus.com/guidelines. And we also hope to get pieces of information, pamphlets, booklets, things like that, to hand out to make people more aware of our program. So we are increasing our outreach as we speak. Again, we're just at the very beginning, but we are looking at improving that process.
This is Maggie. Like Tom said, we're going to be starting a more intensive outreach program coming in March. So if anyone or any group wants a presentation in our region, they can definitely reach out to us. They can email marketing@pacebus.com, and whenever we can accommodate and get staff out there to present, we're more than happy to do so. We're hoping to continue presentations throughout the fall, like through the rest of the year at least, and then of course we'll come out whenever anyone asks.
All right. The next question begins with a comment which says, great panel, and asks the question, how long does a draft review take?
This is Dwayne. It typically takes anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks. It depends on the complexity of the project and how many people in our office we need to discuss with to figure out what needs to be done to improve the project. So anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks.
Thank you, Dwayne. Are your guidelines generally PACE specific, or are they applicable to other transit companies as well? And do you have any comments meant for anyone living outside the Illinois region?
This is Tom. They're not specific to PACE. They're general guidelines that can be applied anywhere in the country, basically. We put them together with that in mind. Some of the examples are local in the guidelines themselves, some of the pictures and things like that, but they're not specific to this region. They can be used just about anywhere, including outside the service area.
Thank you, Tom. This next question kind of was answered by that one, but we'll try it again. Do you think that your guidelines would be helpful, applicable to small, urban, or rural areas with transit service? And could you explain why or why not?
I think they're applicable to outside the region and to any area, because our service area is so large. I mean, we serve rural areas, we serve suburban, city, even into the city. So they'd be applicable almost anywhere, I would think.
Excellent. Next question, how do the bus turnouts relate to bike lanes? It seems that well-used bike lanes could be an interruption of operations.
This is Dwayne here. Well, when there is a bike lane that goes through where we would propose to have a bus turnout at, you typically provide the signage and the lane markings for that bike lane so that it's known that this is a shared use area, so the bicyclists can expect to have a bus enter and go through that section of bike lane. Additionally, there are some ways where you can, depending on the amount of right-of-way, you can also make a separate path that's around the actual turnout.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne. Next question is, have community leaders been willing to say no to automobile uses in TOD areas?
This is Tom. I'm not really aware of that happening. Automobile use, automobiles are everywhere. We're just trying to work with being a transit agency, to work with the communities and getting transit into the community, getting it more accessible. Quite frankly, the automobile is not going to go away, so we're just trying to work with communities to improve transit. And I'm not aware of any, communities that ban automobiles in the downtown area or near developments.
Hi, Dick. This is Adrian. I just want to comment that our guidelines do have techniques for traffic calming in TOD areas, and that we want to reduce the speed of the vehicles to lessen any chance of a pedestrian interaction with the vehicle. So we do talk about traffic calming, and the only example I know of where a city has banned automobiles is in the city of London, that small area. They have an extremely high toll for usage during the day, which I think they found quite effective.
Thanks for that clarification, Adrian. Next question, and I'm sure this is on everyone's mind. How was the development and promotion of the guidelines funded?
We got a Unified Work Program grant through IDOT, through the state and through CMAP to fund the guidelines.
Okay. Next question, where did you look for best practices in developing these guidelines, and what elements did you include that you feel are particularly innovative or an improvement in existing resources?
Well, we did as part of the process of these guidelines, we did a white paper on areas across the country that implement TOD, and some areas that also have similar type guidelines in place now. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but we looked at several communities, I think I mentioned earlier, in Oregon and Washington State, as well as in Colorado and Florida and Georgia, I believe. So we did quite a thorough research on other areas and what types of processes are in place.
All right, thank you. Next question is kind of long, and it is PACE specific, so I'll read it. If you want me to reread any parts of it, just let me know. In addition to being an architect, this individual designs transportation facilities. He's a part of a local neighborhood group focused on redeveloping nearby North Avenue between Austin and Harlem. They are pushing both Oak Park and Chicago to restart and complete a streetscape redevelopment in this corridor, which was left only partly done and unfinished in 2006. The 311 PACE route runs along this corridor. If CDOT reopens the project, is the City of Chicago required to incorporate the new guidelines and draft process into its design planning process? And who should this individual at the coordinate at the village or city officials? Who would they contact to coordinate this process at the village or city level?
All right, this is Dwayne. It's definitely not a requirement for you to use these guidelines. We suggest it because, as you know, we look forward to providing a complete pedestrian and transit network, and that interacts with the vehicle traffic and the roadway as best as possible. So as far as your question regarding who to contact for that, you want to contact transportation. Send an email out to transportation.engineer@pacebus.com, and then we'll get in contact with you, and we'll review the project and work with whoever is in charge between the city and the state, and we'll go from there. Does that answer the entire question, or is there something left out there?
That appears to have answered the whole question, Dwayne. If not, please re-email the question to us, and we'll get back to you. But thank you, Dwayne. Next question is, what are the latest developments on inclusion of bus lanes and stations along the major highways and tollways?
Oh yes, just recently we've implemented Bus on Shoulder program on Interstate 55, and we're actually in the process of rolling this out from I believe Central Avenue all the way just a mile or two west of Lakeshore Drive. Additionally, we're in the process of working with the tollway on the I-90 project, and we'll have BRT lanes and stations along I-90. So those are 2 locations, and that's actually on the western side of I-90, and that project will actually end prior to O'Hare Airport.
Excellent, thank you. How do you handle inclusionary zones and parking regulations for different jurisdictions?
Well, when we have areas where there is on-street parking, we have a design where we can actually put a bus bulb in, so we don't actually have to pull into what would be the parking lane. So in areas where communities want to conserve as much parking as possible, we can definitely suggest adding a bus bulb in that area. Which, if you're not familiar with a bus bulb, basically there's a 10 to 12 foot area where the curb is pretty much extended out through the park lane, so the buses won't have to merge to merge from the travel lane over to the through the parking lane to access the curb, so they can just pull straight up in the lane and continue driving forward from there.
All right. Are there any national design standards that mimic PACE?
I'm not aware of anything that mimics it exactly. We do follow, federal standards, state and local standards, and of course ADA guidelines.
All right, thank you. Are you utilizing any travel trainers or people specifically wheels-on familiar with accessibility issues to assist in this promotion?
Hi, this is Maggie. I can address that. While none of our reps are specifically travel trainers, we do work with the community of people with disabilities quite closely, and we work with the RTA, who has travel trainers as well, to help us make sure that when we are communicating any kind of message, that we offer forms that are accessible to large groups, specifically the blind, seniors who may need large print. We offer audio and braille, and then we will come out also to any workshop or group that includes seniors and people with disabilities to explain anything to them. As far as the development guidelines go, using travel trainers to present probably won't happen, but if we were to go to a group that included seniors or people with disabilities, we would probably consult and see if they have any feedback or suggestions. Bryce is a part of the group that goes out to a lot of senior communities and facilities, so we do have a lot of in-house knowledge when it comes to presenting and communicating with those groups. I hope that answers the question. If not, feel free to follow up.
Thanks, Maggie. Next question is, are you willing, and I assume as a group or as individuals, to consult in the eastern United States as part of a team?
Could you repeat the question? I'm not really sure what the question is meaning. What they mean by consulting.
What they're asking, I think, is if you are willing to consult as a group in the eastern United States. Apparently, I guess maybe we got a little more clarification on that question. The question was basically that: are you willing to consult in the eastern United States as a group or part of a team?
Well, I mean, they could always send us questions or call us, and we'd be more than happy to talk to them and give them, advice that is, or things that we know or things that we've seen, if that helps.
I would think that would be the starting point. Yes, I'm sure it would. Have you experienced issues with property owners not wanting transit service flowing through their lot or front door area? And if so, how do you get them on board to allow it?
Yes, definitely. We experience that sometimes, and it basically depends on the type of business that's there. Sometimes certain banks don't want us to provide a shelter in front of their or a stop in general in front of their business, which you can understand, because sometimes there'll be 10 or 15 people waiting outside of a bank, which can make certain which can definitely make people nervous when they're coming back and forth getting money. But in those situations, we try and move the stop to a alternate location, which may just be instead of having it on a near side stop, we would, if there's available right-of-way and space, we'd move the stop maybe to the other side of the intersection, or maybe even make a mid-block stop. If there's something we can do to get them on board, we definitely have a discussion with them and try and do our best to keep that stop at its location. But sometimes there's just no way you can get around the fact that a bus stop may adversely affect someone's business.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne. Are these guidelines available for areas outside of Northeast Illinois?
They can be accessed on our website, or pacebus.com/guidelines. Anybody can view them, and they can also print them off, print off a copy. So I guess to answer that question, they're available everywhere.
Thank you. Should communities include the development guidelines in their building permit approval process?
I don't see why not. That would be a good idea. Any time that they can look at transit as a viable option in any development would be great.
Okay, excellent. Do your buses directly serve private development or enter private developmental areas? And if so, how are design improvements in bus operations funded in the Chicago area?
I would say it definitely depends on the development and the type of service we have in the area. In some situations, it's a safety concern for us to enter parking lots, especially if the parking lot has not been designed for Pace Bus standards, and if there's going to be added potential of someone backing out of a parking spot, into a bus. So we always look at that to see if it's a viable option and a safe option. What was the second part to that question?
If so, how are design improvements and bus operations funded in the Chicago area? Well,
it basically depends on whether or not this project is a private development or is something that's being requested, where we're requesting improvements on a publicly funded project. In certain situations, when PACE has initiated the contact and we found out that we have a high ridership and it's after the fact and it's a retrofit to a certain area, a lot of those times PACE will pay for this project. But in situations where there's already a project in place and we're making suggestions that will just improve the overall connectivity of a certain business, then we would request the property owner or the city to make those to make the payments for that.
And I suppose if the business contacted you, that would affect that also, if they wanted something that wasn't there, correct?
That's correct.
Correct.
Okay, all right. How important is to have two building access face transit corridors? How much harm is done by having transit service circulate through potentially congested sites? Is there any rule of thumb for transit delays?
Okay, well, definitely, just to jump on the second part of that, as I discussed in the last question, that we try to avoid entering a parking lot or a site that is not equipped for our buses. One, because our buses are larger, and if the pavement was not constructed to a certain standard, we could potentially damage the parking lot from that aspect. And then the other aspect is we try not to navigate through parking lanes. So if the development has provided pretty much a circulator route for us where we can pull into this parking lot and exit without having to go through general parking lanes, then this is something where we would more than likely consider. But in situations where that is not the case, it increases our potential for accidents.
Thank
And
you.
for the first part of the question, I think it was regarding storefront stops and access there. Definitely, it does improve service, and it allows us to, it gives us the opportunity to have closer spacing on our stops, because we know that there are a lot of times that's in a more of a urban environment, and you know that when someone leaves a certain business or is looking to access a certain business, you would it's better for the transit rider to not have to walk more than a quarter or an eighth of a mile to that business.
All right, thank you. Guidelines appear to address intelligent transportation system technology for next bus information, etc. The question is, with the prevalence of smartphones, has any thought been given to users being able to scan a QR code, etc., to make next bus information cheaper to roll out and more prevalent?
I can probably speak. This is Maggie, sorry. To the QR codes. Was I correct in hearing that?
Correct.
We are in the process of we're just at the end of what we might call a demo phase, of where we've gone out and put QR codes in shelters to get feedback on if people are actually using them, if they like them. We're finding that because we don't have a permanent casing to house the actual QR code, we're facing some problems of keeping that information available, as well as with the technology. If one thing changes about the link, the QR code is then dead. So we're still trying to make the process a little bit better and more reliable, but it is out there and people are using it. I can't give you exact numbers on to how popular it is, but it's definitely worthwhile enough for us to keep doing it and try and make the process a little bit better and more reliable. As far as other technologies, we're pursuing a contract to do text for times. CTA does that, and we're trying to do something similar and hope to have that going this year, where someone would just text a number that is specific to the bus stop they're at and the route that they're trying to ride, and the next bus time, along with the next two scheduled times, would bounce back directly to them. And then we're also exploring actual real digital signage, next bus information that will be going up at stops. I believe we have some that are in process that are going in at a couple of transit centers. Again, this is like demo phase of getting it up and making sure it's working with our bus tracker software. But yeah, all of these technologies will make the waiting process a little bit easier for the rider, so we want to pursue them. And we're still looking at, and I can't even say we're in process of, but we've just started to look at apps and smartphone usage and stuff like that. Did I miss anything,
Thanks, Maggie. I think you got it all. Sounds like it's a work in progress, huh?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we're trying to keep up, but we don't want to put it out there until we're sure it's actually helpful.
All right, next question. Are stop locations cited with TSP operations as a consideration? Example, mid-block versus far side or near side.
All right, this is Dwayne here. And to answer the question, yes, definitely. We prefer, in general, we prefer far side bus stops, and especially when it is along a future or current TSP route. And the main reason for that is we don't want our buses to request a longer green and then have to stop near side or mid block, because we may request that longer green and still not be able to go through the intersection before it turns red. So in those situations, when there is TSP, we would prefer a far side bus stop.
Excellent, thank you. To what extent does transit-oriented development weigh in the design guidelines and selection of routes?
Well, I mean, routes are selected on potential ridership. If we have a good development that will, attract more people to it, then the route would become more successful. Obviously, we don't look at just putting in a route just because it is a transit-oriented development, because it depends on what the generators are, what type of bus route goes there. going to be a circulator route, or is it going to be like a shuttle or a fixed route? So there's a lot of factors that go into it, not necessarily transit-oriented development, but in a lot of cases that does improve the transit and ultimately improve the ridership.
Okay, next question. Does PACE provide litter baskets at each bus stop? And if not, how do they help keep bus stops clean of litter?
I'll answer that question. This is Dwayne. At a lot of our shelter locations, our bus shelter locations, we do provide litter baskets there. And to keep those locations clean, we have a service that goes around once every 2 weeks and removes the debris and cleans the shelters and just keeps the area up in general. But at our typical bus stop locations, no, we do not provide litter baskets there.
But that process seems to keep the bus stops clean and functioning, huh?
Yes, definitely. For our shelter locations, we definitely keep those up and keep the area clean and keep the pavement if there's which has definitely been a challenge as far as the snow removal and just keeping the general area tidy. It's been a challenge with the snow removal, but for the trash and everything else, we definitely stay on top of that.
Yeah, this winter has been a challenge for everybody in all kinds of different ways. Next question is, could you discuss resolution of bus routes and conflicts with designated bike routes regarding safety, particularly at stops and at intersections?
Okay, this question came up earlier today, and when we do have a bike lane going through what would be our bus stop, we typically request, well, it's not even a request, it's something that's normally built into the design of the bike lane when it's striped out, that they put signs up and you mark the bike lane so that the bicyclist knows that this lane has just switched over from a bike-only lane to now it's a shared bike-bus lane. So that's typically what we do. And when the bus stops and pulls over, then if the bicyclist wants to pass the bus, they can then merge into the general lane and become a general vehicle with regular traffic to get around the bus. But a lot of times bicyclists will just wait behind the bus because you know that within the next block the bus is going to pass them again. So.
Excellent. Based on time, this is probably going to be about our last question. It does have a couple of follow-ups we'll get to if we can. First question is, while you were developing the guidelines, you said an advisory and technical committee was formed. How was this process, and do you think it was effective?
This is Tom. It was definitely effective because the groups we had on the committees were involved throughout the process of developing the guidelines. We had developers and community representatives, had engineers, planners, we had advocates for transit such as the Active Transit Alliance, we've had CMAP, and then our sister agencies like METRA and CTA and RTA. So having everybody involved from the beginning, they were all excited about the process, and the process went very smoothly because they were involved throughout the duration of putting together the guidelines. So I think it was very effective, and I would totally recommend that for anybody that wants to do something like this. They have the buy-in from the beginning and during the process. It makes it easier.
All right, and then kind of a follow-up to that, how will you assure that municipalities implement these guidelines?
Well, we have our representatives that are going out talking to all the communities and the developers. So the process is continuing on. They're aware of it, and sometimes they come to us and ask us, well, we would like a bus route here, or we would like a shelter here, and is it possible to do that? They may look at the guidelines and see that some of the processes that are necessary to do that. So it is quite effective. The guidelines are voluntarily available, and they're not a regulation per se that we can enforce. So we don't say you have to do this or you have to do that. We want them to come to us and ask us if we can do this and how they can help us do it. So it's a good process.
This is, I think, kind of been touched on, but just to elaborate on it a little bit more, how can PACE encourage private development to use these guidelines, like in a senior center, for example?
In that particular example, we can encourage the developer to use our guidelines as it makes the development more attractive to potential residents. It's also beneficial for developments to have transit accommodation, especially if they're going after a LEED standard for their building. But once again, we can't enforce these guidelines because they are, as titled, just guidelines. But obviously they have to go through regular municipal review, and often these regulations overlap.
Okay, one more follow-up. How does PACE evaluate what type of stop is appropriate? Bus, bulb versus turnout versus flag stop?
This is Dwayne. Well, as far as the flag stop versus the posted stop, we're actually in the process of transitioning all of our routes, all of our fixed routes over to posted stops. So hopefully in the near future, every fixed route that we have out there will have posted signs up at every stop. As far as how do we decide what stop to implement as far as near side versus far side versus bus bulb versus a turnout, it's definitely identified in our guidelines where where there are certain disadvantages to each stop type. Where we're looking for our turnouts at are typically our high dwell time locations where there are either a high number of riders that get on at this stop. We also would look for whether or not there's been a history of rear ends at that location, what the speed is on that roadway, and also the right-of-way that we have there. Because if we don't have the right-of-way due to a very small setback for buildings there, then that definitely wouldn't be an option. As far as our near side versus our far side stops, like I said earlier, we look for our far sides at pretty much every location where there is a signalized intersection. And the main reason for that is because when you have a near side stop, there's a greater potential for vehicles that wanted to make a right turn to jump in the lane adjacent to the bus stop and make that right turn in front of the bus, which can, as you can imagine, can cause accidents and even issues with pedestrians being struck from crossing the adjacent roadway. Additionally, another reason why we prefer the far side stops is because our bus has the opportunity to pass the signal, which basically saves the time on the route. So we end up saving several minutes on our entire route by switching over to far side stops.
All right, well, it looks like we've run out of time, so if we didn't have a chance to get to your particular question, you'll have an opportunity to submit it in a brief survey that will pop up at the conclusion of this webinar. Bryce, Tom, Dwayne, Adrian, and Maggie, once again, I'd like to thank you for an excellent presentation. And thanks again to PACE Suburban Bus Services for making this webinar possible. We certainly couldn't do it without your support. Okay, that'll do it. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.